Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to History and Systems of Psychology. If I'm right, we are on week 14, day 1. Happy to have you here today. Housekeeping items, exam grades are posted and you did very, very well. I was so pleased overall. So good job, everyone. Hooray. End of semester items, your photo voice project as well as your final exam, which will not be cumulative, will both be due online May 11th, which is Sunday, by 11:59 p.m. If it's after that time, you've officially missed the semester, okay? So you don't want to be that person, right? You want to get those things in. The final exam will be over the items that we covered since the last exam. So a section of Freud, some information on Alport, Maslow, positive psychology, and what we cover next week. Any questions on that? Or any questions in general? Yes?
When is the last day of class right now?
The last day of class is a week from Thursday.
Wow. That's crazy, actually.
Is it crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so fast.
It has gone by fast in some ways.
Yeah.
Really, you have to ask me on any given day, how fast has it gone by? I don't know if that's the same for you, but I'm guessing perhaps it is. Today, we will quickly summarize Thursday's class. We finished up information related to Freud, and we also talked about a few people very briefly about Alport and about Maslow. I will be filling in those details about both psychologists who are super important, as well as discussing the origins, briefly discussing the origins of positive psychology. Toward the end of class, there'll be a video we're going to watch that talks about, it's Dr. Seligman. He is one of the founders of positive psychology, and it's a wonderful, wonderful TED Talk. So I hope that you enjoy. All right, let's start by finding out what you remember from last week.
Most of us are donuts.
That most of you are donuts. I love it. Okay, yes.
That was carrot cake, by the way.
You were carrot cake. Now what's carrot cake?
I had to screenshot it so that I would.
You know, without a frame of reference, this makes no sense to people outside of this class, right?
So very mature. People either love you or hate you, but you don't care because you're comfortable with who you are. Confident. Never let your emotions control your life.
So you are one polarizing figure, and I could see people either really like carrot cake or they don't so much.
Yeah.
All right, but most of the rest of us are donuts or birthday cake, depending on what personality quiz we are taking. All right, thank you for starting us off with that. Other items.
Remember character traits versus characteristics.
Excellent. Is that everything?
Watch the Maslow video.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that?
He talked about his hierarchy of needs. Not he, but the video did. His self-actualizer stuff that he went through. How self-actualizers are independent of the opinion of others was something that I noted.
Kind of carrot cakey.
And being a self-actualizer is succeeding at being human.
And being who you really are, right?
And then growth and improvement through the things that you face, always learning from what you're going through.
Sure. That could be learning from things that went well, as well as learning through adversity, taking those times of adversity and being able to reframe them, which is not always easy, in a positive way so that you can continue to grow as a person. He definitely felt that growth was something that took place along the lifespan. So you're never wanting to be in this place where you're stagnating if you're going to be a healthy, fulfilled individual. Other things. Madison, anything you remember?
I have underlined from the Maslow video, be true to your own nature.
What does that mean?
Be yourself.
Be yourself, right? In order to do that, you have to be self-aware enough to know who you are. I say that kind of facetiously, but I do not know that everyone deeply knows who they are as people. For those of you taking a psychology course like this one, you're perhaps a little bit more introspective than the average person, and I would guess you have more intrapersonal awareness. So intrapersonal awareness is awareness of yourself, and interpersonal, hopefully you also have a lot of that, is awareness toward other people. Okay, very good. Thank you, Madison. Anything else? All right, we will move on. Personality psychology, pretty exciting, interesting stuff in my very humble opinion. We talked a little bit about Gordon Allport. He was born close to 1900 and died relatively recently when we think of people like Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, very recently in 1967. He was born in, I believe it's Cleveland, Ohio. His father was an entrepreneurial doctor. I thought that was an interesting way to characterize a doctor. I'm not exactly sure what that means. It could mean many, many things. His mom was a retired school teacher with a strong sense of religious sensibility. And this sounds like so many moms of so many of the psychologists that we have studied, right? I will say, however, that was probably pretty common back in the day when religious or organized religion was much more a central component of people's lives than it is today in the U.S. Home life was marked by hard work. Everyone in the family, they were hard workers, and by Protestant piety. Allport was an excellent student. He was accepted into Harvard in 1915. He happened to have a brother who we've talked about very briefly, an older brother by the name of Floyd. Gordon Allport was working on his undergraduate degree while his brother was working on his PhD in experimental psychology. Perhaps a bit of nepotism there, I'm not sure. But I will say that the younger Allport benefited from his brother being on that campus because his brother was really a standout to begin with. All right, Münsterberg. I think I said that correctly, and there's a giant picture of Münsterberg. The introduction to psychology class that Gordon Allport took was taught by Hugo Münsterberg. He was from Germany. And after William James retired from Harvard, he came on as James's successor. Münsterberg is, I don't hear his name enough, but he's a very important contributor to psychology, especially as applied psychology is concerned. What do I mean by applied psychology? We can think of experimental psychology on one hand and applied psychology on the other hand.
In the reaction of what they've learned.
Yes, so taking those theoretical underpinnings and ideas and applying them to real world practical types of things. So using the ideas to, in the case of a therapist, improve someone's life or help them get better if they are struggling with a mental illness of some sort. He was very foundational in terms of contributions to IO psychology, which stands for what? EIEIO. Not that. It could be. Industrial organizational psychology. Okay, I'm gonna ask you that on Thursday and we'll see, we have more happy faces. Not so confused. Workplace psychology. In this particular class, Alport was exposed to the ideas of applied psychology, but following the class, his exposure became much broader, which he liked a lot. The American vision of psychology, I would say from its beginnings, and some people may say I'm wrong on this, was much more expansive and I think accepting of new ideas compared to German psychology. There was an emphasis on pluralism, which means lots of different ideas about psychology were fairly accepted. People were early American psychologists combining ideas, right, from people as early as Aristotle and Socrates through Descartes and more updated type people like Hall. And they said broad-minded. There was that openness to suggestion, to trying out new things. I can only imagine the think tank that was at Harvard during this time, like how amazing that would have been as a psychologist, because you're amidst these people who are the major figures in psychology. Floyd, like I said, was Alport's brother. He was a strong promoter of this type of pluralistic and broad-minded approach. And he also just happened to write a groundbreaking dissertation on social facilitation. I ask you now, what is social facilitation? Kylie?
I guess I would kind of say like I don't know if like managing is the correct word,
Mm-hmm.
but like kind of organizing how things are flowing socially, I guess. Like you're, I don't know if I'm wording that correctly. Like it makes sense in my head, but.
Right, and I can see your point. Let's say that you are a researcher and you have organized a focus group.
Yeah, and you're trying to like how that goes, I guess, how that process works.
Right, facilitating a successful focus group. Has anyone been in a focus group before? No one at all? They're usually composed about between 5 to 7 people, and really you can do a focus group with almost any given topic. They're done a lot in marketing research to determine how likely someone is to buy a product, or a new product comes out and they want people's opinions on the packaging or how this bread tastes, because there are already oodles of whole grain, low calorie bread out there, right? So what makes this different, or what can we improve upon? And the idea of a focus group is you get more bang for your buck than if you were to interview people solely, right? So I asked all of you about this new bread. Do you like the packaging? How does it taste? How does it compare price-wise? I can get a lot more done in an hour if I have a focus group. Additionally, as is true, I think a lot in class time, we will bounce ideas off of one another. Someone will say something that all of a sudden it piques someone's brain and they respond, yeah, I agree with that, or no, that bread was disgusting, right? The packaging, very cute, disgusting bread. The social facilitator is usually the researcher, and their main responsibility during that time is to make sure everyone gets an opportunity to share and make sure that the focus group doesn't become governed by one individual. And most of the time when I have conducted focus groups, I've been able to do that pretty well with the monitoring. There is one that will forever be in my mind where the person had such a strong personality and such a strong opinion about the topic that I don't know how he was able to talk so long without breathing. Like, there were not commas or periods in that language at all. So a good social facilitator would do well managing a focus group, right? Social facilitation can also include items such as mesmer, right? The idea that, and that social contagion sort of thing. Excellent. Thank you, Kylie. Well, Alport graduated. He did great things in his undergraduate degree. His brother was doing great things with his PhD, and he went to Turkey, which is actually where my niece is right now. She's in Istanbul studying. He taught English and sociology at a small American-operated school. Harvard was really wanting him to return to pursue a PhD. My guess is that some level they thought, well, his brother's really successful, so he'll probably be successful too. Just a year teaching English and sociology in Turkey, and then back to Harvard to return for a PhD. Everyone, did we briefly discuss, or did we watch a video that discussed the meeting of Alport and Freud?
I don't remember seeing anything about it.
Okay. One moment. We know that so many psychologists that we have recently discussed had some sort of contact with Freud, all right? And ones that we'll be discussing in the future. This is a little bit of a story that would be interesting for you to have. Okay, before he returned to Harvard for his PhD in psychology, he stopped in Vienna to visit another older brother who happened to be working there. Freud was getting famous in the English-speaking world. Alport wanted to meet Freud, and he did. Alport recalled later, with a callow forwardness characteristic of age 22, I wrote to Freud that I was in Vienna and implied that no doubt he would be glad to make my acquaintance. That's bold, isn't it, for someone who's 22 years old, right? Maybe 23 after the year in Turkey. Surprisingly, I would be surprised if Freud received something like that. I wonder, like, he had to have laughed, right? Freud invited him to his office, and Alport found himself in the uncomfortable position of having wrangled an interview without knowing what he would talk about. Well, here's Freud. We have the meeting. Now what? In the moment he was grasping for something to say, he impulsively told Freud about a small boy he had recently observed who had loudly and publicly expressed great anxiety about getting dirty. He's weaving this story. So this is a boy with a dirt phobia. Hoping Freud might be interested in this account of a juvenile dirt phobia, Alport was flabbergasted when Freud fixed his kindly therapeutic eyes upon me and said, "And was that little boy you?" Which would be what Freud would do as a psychoanalyst, right? Those who knew Alport personally have noted that he was in fact fastidious about his own appearance and cleanliness, displaying at least some of the traits of a well-adjusted Freudian anal character. In addition, as the youngest of 4 boys, he may have been especially sensitive to being characterized as a little boy. In retrospect, Alport acknowledged that in a therapeutic setting, Freud's comment might have been appropriate, but felt that in this more casual context, therapy was not at issue. Freud had apparently failed to appreciate his manifest motivation, a rude curiosity and youthful ambition. And something that he had a criticism Alport had of Freud, psychoanalysis, and of Carl Jung was that sometimes what we see on the surface is what's there. We don't always have to dig super deep. That gives you an idea, though, about his character and his sense of self at an early age. He insisted that when dealing with, I put normal people in everyday situations in quotes, because I don't know that if any of us are truly normal, right? This approach should be preceded and complemented by an understanding of their more conscious assessments of themselves. So more of an introspection with the person thinking about what's going on and not necessarily reaching for therapeutic help to have someone else tell them what's wrong and how to fix it. Good old Floyd had recently accepted a junior faculty position at Harvard after his groundbreaking PhD, and he made Gordon his editorial assistant of this little journal called the Journal of Abnormal and Social Psychology. And I do say that facetiously because it was a very important journal. During this time, a new topic was emerging, and that topic was personality. The word personality was gradually assuming new meaning and significance for psychologists during this period of time. It was derived from the Greek word persona. And during the early 1900s, the term gained further meaning as a rough substitute for the traditional word character. All right, indicating a set of qualities that makes a person distinctive, that are characteristic of them. However, when we think of the word character, I don't know about you, but moral judgments come to mind. Okay? I mean, you can think about character, and the first thing I would do, like people's character, are they morally upstanding or not, from what I witness of them, right? More broadly, though, we should be thinking about character as features of that individual, but it's really hard to separate those two. So there was this idea that we need to replace this word character with something else. Personality was considered a more objective and neutral term to describe someone. Okay, psychological testing and specifically intelligence testing was well underway in the early 1900s. I want to ask you, what do you remember about intelligence testing? Christina. Then we'll take you. Okay.
Sorry. I remember talking about it.
We did, yes. Do you remember anything related to the war and intelligence testing?
I remember that it's kind of like an IQ test.
Exactly.
We took that they took in
Right, that we determine might not be the best IQ test to take today or back then. Good, thank you. All right.
Oh,
You look super excited. Like, I got it. And then I didn't let you talk.
It's just I had a flashback to when we took that test, and I was like, it's heavily favored more towards that time whenever the test was made. 'Cause,
Sure.
you're not gonna know basic facts from 1920s or something like that.
Right. Unless you're a historian.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, studying very specific things like soap, right? Intelligence testing, think back even further to testing items like your response time. Testing things, we're gonna get a crude assessment by measuring your head and doing craniometry. I always say that wrong, so I just have to say it very slowly. Alfred Binet is someone that we'll talk about a little bit on Thursday. That is when you hear the word IQ, most people think about Binet. He had a lot to do with IQ testing, although prior to that, he was involved in something very, very different. Well, there's intelligence testing out here, and I guess it's great to know who's smart. It can serve various purposes. For instance, IQ testing can help people who maybe people who don't score as high get help they need. It may show where there is maybe capacity hasn't been fully developed in certain areas. And that's really good information for us to have, right? And it's also good if we see someone who's doing very, very well on the IQ test. If we want to provide an early education that's more enriched for them, we can do that. Beyond intelligence testing, however, a few psychologists became interested in studying the book calls it non-intellective characteristics of measures, and these over time became known as personality tests. There were handwriting tests. I'm sure that's probably fun to do. Has anyone taken a handwriting test to see what your personality is? You can do that online. The University of Wyoming psychologist June Etta Downey, look at that, a female, used features of handwriting analysis in 1919 to obtain scores on personal traits such as impulsivity, carefulness, and forcefulness. You've seen my handwriting. I'm not going to bode well on that. All right. I know we don't even do that much handwriting anymore, but can you see any merit to this? Might handwriting have something to do with someone's impulsivity?
Maybe to a certain extent. Because like some people take more care into like having clear handwriting and like understandable, and then others, I like just write down as fast as I
And maybe
can.
you can read it later?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if that like with doctors, I feel like 9 times out of 10 it's like chicken scratch.
Almost like they've taken a class to learn how to do that, right? Mm-hmm.
So just an aside, so a lot of our handwriting style, like typically why men usually have messier handwriting than women. A lot of that is the neuronal connections that are made when we're learning to write. So typically women or girls at the time are able to sit still, a little bit less impulsive, and concentrate. And they want to do better on their penmanship.
Some do.
So they establish those neuronal connections and they typically have nicer handwriting than a lot of.
That's very interesting. And now,
It can ultimately go back to a little bit of impulsivity, but
right, and again, just focusing on myself. I'm thinking back to doing handwriting. I absolutely hated it. I hated sitting still and I didn't understand what the value of it, right? And I would not get good scores. And I've got good scores on most everything else, but naturally my penmanship wasn't strong. And you get a little grade or like a little checkbox like needs help, and mine needed help. And so I would practice penmanship at home to redo my penmanship assignments. And it was still really bad. And I would practice and my mom would be like, nope, you're starting over. So I had a hard time buying into it. I also was very wiggly. So yeah, there might be more to that explanation. How many of you even learned handwriting kind of, yeah, cursive or print? Really? Okay.
I stopped cursive after 4th grade. It was like
You either have it or you don't.
and they're starting to, so a lot of schools stopped teaching cursive. They're starting to teach it again because now we have a whole generation of people who can't do a legal signature on a document because they never learned cursive.
That's very interesting. Well, thank you, Eric, for that information. That's going to have me think. I'm going to have to do some more research and come with it on Thursday. Let's see, impulsivity, carefulness, I could see that, and forcefulness, maybe, in her individual will temperament test. Would have been interesting to take. And here I have a picture that you probably can't see. But this is Downey Group Will Temperament Test. That's the first page. That's not a QR code, I don't think, right there. Kind of looks like it from far away. And then this is the second page. I couldn't get to the actual measure and the amount of time I had, but if I can find it, that would be a fun one to do along with the TAT perhaps on Thursday. There was also a personal data sheet. Woodworth at Columbia University developed a series of questions to be answered yes or no. And these questions were intended as a test of emotional stability to screen out soldiers who were psychologically unfit for active duty in World War I. We come back again to the war. Although completed too late to be used in the war, it was one of the first attempts to develop an objective self-report personality test. Find that interesting. Moving back to Alport, well, the brothers both being at Harvard either as new professor or doctoral student decided that, no one's provided a systematic overview of what they called an elusive term. What does personality really mean? And the two of them thought, we can do this, all right? So they forged along and they concluded the unifying concept of personality studies was a trait and consisted of 4 groups under the general headings of intelligence, temperament, self-expression, and sociality. What do you think about these? Is there more to personality than that? Does intelligence belong with personality?
I think so.
You think so?
I'd say so, yeah.
Why?
Well, it's not even based on how smart you are, but kind of how you hold yourself and how much you apply your own intelligence. Some people might be street smart, so they'll lean into that, into their
Right.
personality, and it helps them develop who they are compared to I'm gonna keep working really hard to be a book smart person, even though I'm not that personality or intelligent wise.
Yeah, and we often refer to people in terms of personality as street smart or book smart. Excellent point. I'd not considered that. Others, thoughts on this list of 4 main traits?
I feel like this could be the generalized versus specific thing that we maybe talked about
Yes.
in personality, where these are the very specific things, but everything else falls in some way under those 4.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we can take those as 4 factors and then the all traits can be basically grouped into one of those 4. Okay, good. Anyone else? Great. Alport won a fellowship for a prestigious postdoc study in Germany. Because of this, he was introduced to yet another German psychologist. Now, do you remember anything about Gestalt psychology?
That's the comparison of objects put together as a whole versus individual.
Right. Gestalt refers to form. And Gestalt psychologists say that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. A lot of times people mix this up and say that the quote as the whole is the sum of the parts, but they thought it was actually something greater. And so they were interested in looking at that holistic approach to studying personality. Stern promoted something called personalistic psychology. And that central concept was we are going to consider the individual with the main goal being to understand each person's individuality, all right? This idea we're going to study the self. And there are 2 ways to approach this according to Stern: relational individuality and real individuality. If you'd like to follow along, I'm on page 453. Last paragraph about halfway through. Stern argued that there are two ways to approach this goal of understanding a person's individuality. One was to investigate what he called relational individuality. And this is a stats item. We are going to define the person's relative or statistical positions on a large variety of separately measured traits. All right, we're using stats to determine that. When the number of traits is large, no two people are likely to have the same pattern of scores, right? If we have a whole lot that we are measuring and we're gathering numerical values on, even though they may be the same on a small number of traits. More important to Stern than relational individuality, however, was what he called real individuality. A Gestalt-like conception of each person's unique and unified self that is more than the sum of its individual characteristics. Real individuality, Stern argued, must be approached not by statistical comparisons, which do have validity to them, with other persons, but by examining the relationship of qualities within each person, primarily through the close analysis of individual life histories or case studies. Does that make sense? The idea that we can compare one person to other people versus focusing on the individual and unpacking their unique characteristics. Well, his visit to Germany and his talks with Stern influenced Gordon greatly. He graduated from Harvard and he taught somewhere else, but he became a permanent professor at Harvard after that. He developed the Allport-Vernon study of values along with Verdin, and they ranked preferences for statements written to reflect 6 different types of values. There were statements that you would rank related to economic values, aesthetic values, perhaps what you think beauty is, theoretical, political statements, social statements, and religious statements. So we're looking at economic, aesthetic, theoretical, political, social, and religious items. This is something pretty fascinating. Along with Dr. Henry Odbert, which is an unfortunate last name, I think, they developed a lexical, which is basically a word approach to understanding personality. They gleaned through the dictionary, looked at every word in the dictionary to find all the words that were used to describe personal characteristics or traits. And that ended up being around a little under 5% of the dictionary. Wow. This was before you had help with analysis, computer analysis, right? Wow, that's a lot of grunt work going on there. He wrote a very famous book called Personality, A Psychological Interpretation. He talked about a lot of different things in there. Something that we're going to discuss a little bit are the 2 different styles or different styles of researching personality, idiographic and nomothetic. I may be making this up, but I feel that we touched on this in class sometime last week. Maybe it was in my personality class and not this one. Unsure. Well, if you've never seen the words, there they are. All right. In terms of personality, nomothetic methods are going to study people in terms of general dimensions or characteristics, which is more akin to the relational individuality approach, right? And we're going to see how people vary quantitatively. Idiographic methods are looking at what makes you unique, which is more likely to be a qualitative approach. We may examine, like, give me your journal. You might be like, no way. But we could use the insight that we gain from reading your journal. Maybe we ask 5 people to discuss your personality, and we watch you and make you very uncomfortable looking at you in action to determine your personality. And we take some information about your life growing up, and we use those different items to construct a very detailed version of a specific person's personality. Make sense? So that's something that the case study method would employ. Generally speaking today, I'm not sure if I've covered it in this class, case studies are done when we see someone who has perhaps a very unique condition or who is very unique in some form or fashion, and we learn a whole lot about that person, and then that information can be shared. Case studies are often done in medical research. Maybe someone has a specific, let's just say, dermatological condition or has very rare patellar issues. And so we find out all about that person's physiology, and that provides useful information should a doctor come across someone that is similar in that respect. Something that we will talk about more next week is letters from Jenny. At Harvard, they don't really talk about, the authors don't talk about it much in this book, but letters from Jenny is a very important contribution of Alport. All right, I'm going to do a very brief synopsis of this. And if you would like to interject at any point, please do. Gordon had a friend at Harvard, his roommate. And when they first started at Harvard, Gordon was much more of an introspective fellow, you know, very good student, wanting to learn a lot about the mind. And his roommate was much more gregarious and outgoing, sort of the kind of person who would just, you know, put themselves out there and the world can like me or not type of thing. All right, so very contrasting styles of relating to others and presenting themselves that Gordon found interesting. Well, his roommate goes off to war and comes back and is never the same. All right, he dies in his, I believe, mid-20s. The roommate's mom sort of adopts Gordon as her own child and gloms onto him. Gordon is everything her child was not, maybe in an effort to be at peace with his death, okay? And they begin a correspondence with Gordon's wife, and Jenny, over a series of years, back and forth. Well, after Jenny's death, Alport and colleagues analyze all the letters, and they determine from all of the letters back and forth what Jenny's personality was. Interesting, very interesting approach. What might be some items that would be questionable? What might be questionable about using this approach?
I would be the same as if you tried to do a personality inventory based on somebody's Facebook profile. Like, that's when you're writing somebody else, like that's you're conscientiously putting thought into how those words present themselves.
That's good. So if we were to analyze someone like that, back and forth exchanges via any type of social media, yeah. And do you think more before you post on social media than you would if you were talking? Yeah, I've seen a whole lot of nods. Yeah. So it may or may not be your true self, right? You're going to be cognizant of the way you're presenting yourself. Good.
Good. Others.
I feel like I write a lot different than like how I actually am. Like,
Tell me a little bit more about that.
which I guess this is more like school related, but
Uh-huh.
I try to put like not like a professional like face on for writing, but like I understand like when I'm submitting something, like I'm not just like how I'm texting my friends.
Right, there's an
There's-
academic writing.
yeah.
And that's
So-
important to develop.
There, she may have tried to be like more professional in her writing, and that may not have portrayed her true personality.
Good, good point. Others?
One more, if she had already lost her son by the time she started sending the letters, like maybe a little bit of PTSD from that.
Okay.
PTSD is one of those things that fundamentally changes personality.
It's a really good point.
So before may not necessarily equate to after.
Very good. Anything else?
So when you're writing's a one-way thing, because it's like you, the pencil and the paper. You aren't portraying it to anybody else. It's whatever you are feeling in your brain, and it's whatever you're gonna write. So I feel like that's just it's like really hard to look into something if it's just gonna reflect back to whatever you're kind of thinking to some aspect. Also,
Yeah.
when you said that she died, like is there not like a weird moral thing like reading
No,
her
I
letter?
mean, one would think so, but
Yeah, it's like, isn't that a
if
problem
we're thinking
too?
of character in the other way,
Yeah.
the moral way, I think that's really tricky. And
But I don't know. I just feel like it's very hard to judge somebody based off something that they're writing about like a situation because it's just so like one-sided. It's not a conversation. You can't see their mannerisms. You can't see how they're actually acting.
that's a good point. One thing I'll say that contrasts just a little bit with what you're saying is, to me, I don't know how you
can be solely objective, especially if you're writing this person back and forth, because what you're writing could be influencing how someone responds, right? Or the topics that you cover. There's a lot that might not be covered. So although it's pretty fascinating, there are definitely holes in that approach. That being said, what I would like for you to do before next class is go online, and all you'll need to do is type in letters from Jenny in Alport, and a lot of items are going to come up, and I'd like to see what you find on that. Many people have discussed this method. On to Maslow, who we touched on in class last week. Maslow, early on in his college career, met someone by the name of Henry Harlow, who had just joined the faculty at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, where Maslow had been accepted to graduate school. And Harlow was interested in animals and seeing to what extent do animals or can animal behavior inform us of people's behavior. He systematically observed monkeys' behaviors, and this is just a tiny clip. You can see as Harlow's assistant, Maslow systematically observed monkeys' behaviors alongside Harlow. Let's see if we can make this work. No. Hopefully you can make that work in the comfort of your own home or the library or wherever you choose to open up this PowerPoint. Okay. Everyone, that's all I have for the PowerPoint for today. What I'm going to leave you with is a video on positive psychology. I'm jumping around a little bit, but the focus on the individual over time led to studying items like Maslow studied. How can we make the most out of what we have? How can we be our best selves? And Seligman is someone who falls in that realm of positive psychology. And so what's the difference between positive psychology, or let me ask another question. What's toxic positivity?
Being manipulative in a way,
Being manipulative in a way, can you tell me a little bit more?
like expecting something out of being positive towards somebody.
Yes. As another person who's in personality, thank you. So by being really kind toward them, perhaps, yeah. Toxic positivity is also like, you should be so grateful for what you have. Someone maybe is sharing a distressing thought or something that happened, or like, you're so lucky, you should just like get over it and smile, or you should just smile. That is, I suppose it's good to smile, and sometimes you can work things from the outside in. If you smile, sometimes that can make you feel happier, but maybe you don't need to feel happier at that moment. Maybe you need to feel whatever you're feeling, right? So positive psychology acknowledges that. It's not the same as happy psychology, like a how-to manual on this is just how to be happy. It is very realistic. So, and to that end, we're going to watch this video, and then before class on Thursday, I would like a write-up of this video. It will be a summary/reflection in your own words, and I will post a Dropbox, and we will start our discussion of class on this video. I hope that you enjoy it.
When I was president of the American Psychological, the media trained me. And an encounter I had with CNN summarizes what I'm going to be talking about today, which is the 11th reason to be optimistic. The editor of Discover told us 10 of them. I'm going to give you the 11th. So they came to me, CNN, and they said, Professor Seligman, would you tell us about the state of psychology today? We'd like to interview you about that. And I said, great. He said, but this is CNN, so you only get a soundbite. So, well, how many words do I get? I said, well, one. The cameras rolled, and she said, Professor Seligman, what is the state of psychology today? Good. Cut. That won't do. We'd really better give you a longer soundbite. Well, how many words do I get this time? Well, you get 2. Dr. Seligman, what is the state of psychology today? Not good. Look, Dr. Seligman, we can see you're really not comfortable in this medium. We'd better give you a real soundbite. This time you can have 3 words. And Professor Seligman, what is the state of psychology today? Not good enough. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. I want to say why psychology was good, why it was not good, and how it may become in the next 10 years good enough. And by parallel summary, I want to say the same thing about technology, about entertainment and design, because I think the issues are very similar. So why was psychology good? Well, for more than 60 years, psychology worked within the disease model. 10 years ago when I was on an airplane and I introduced myself to my seatmate and told them what I did, they'd move away from me. And because quite rightly, they were saying psychology is about finding what's wrong with you, spot the loony. And now when I tell people what I do, they move toward me. And what was good about psychology, about the $30 billion investment NIMH made, about working in the disease model, about what you mean by psychology, is that 60 years ago, none of the disorders were treatable. It was entirely smoke and mirrors. And now 14 of the disorders are treatable, 2 of them actually curable. And the other thing that happened is that a science developed, a science of mental illness, that we found out that we could take fuzzy concepts like depression, alcoholism, and measure them with rigor. that we could create a classification of the mental illnesses, that we could understand the causality of the mental illnesses. We could look across time at the same people, for example, who are genetically vulnerable to schizophrenia, and ask what the contribution of mothering, of genetics are. And we could isolate third variables by doing experiments on the mental illnesses. And best of all, we were able in the last 50 years to invent drug treatments and psychological treatments. And then we were able to test them rigorously in random assignment, placebo-controlled designs, throw out the things that didn't work, keep the things that actively did. And the conclusion of that is that psychology and psychiatry of the last 60 years can actually claim that we can make miserable people less miserable. And I think that's terrific. I'm proud of it. But what was not good, the consequences of that, were three things. The first was moral, that psychologists and psychiatrists became victimologists, pathologizers, that our view of human nature was that if you were in trouble, bricks fell on you. And we forgot that people made choices and decisions. We forgot responsibility. That was the first cost. The second cost was that we forgot about you people. We forgot about improving normal lives. We forgot about a mission to make relatively untroubled people happier, more fulfilled, more productive. And genius, high talent, became a dirty word. No one works on that. And the third problem about the disease model is in our rush to do something about people in trouble, in our rush to do something about repairing damage, it never occurred to us to develop interventions to make people happier, positive interventions. So that was not good. And so that's what led people like Nancy Etkoff, Dan Gilbert, Mike Csikszentmihalyi, and myself to work in something I call positive psychology, which has three aims. The first is that psychology should be just as concerned with human strength as it is with weakness. It should be just as concerned with building strength as with repairing damage. It should be interested in the best things in life, and it should be just as concerned with making the lives of normal people fulfilling and with genius, with nurturing high talent. So, in the last 10 years, and the hope for the future, we've seen the beginnings of a science of positive psychology, a science of what makes life worth living. It turns out that we can measure different forms of happiness, and any of you for free can go to that website and take the entire panoply of tests of happiness. You can ask, how do you stack up for positive emotion, for meaning, for flow, against literally tens of thousands of other people. We created the opposite of the diagnostic manual of the insanities, a classification of the strengths and virtues that looks at the sex ratio, how they're defined, how to diagnose them, what builds them and what gets in their way. We found that we could discover the causation of the positive states, the relationship between left hemispheric activity and right hemispheric activity as a cause of happiness. I've spent my life working on extremely miserable people, and I've asked the question, how do extremely miserable people differ from the rest of you? And starting about 6 years ago, we asked about extremely happy people, and how do they differ from the rest of us? And it turns out there's one way, very surprising, they're not more religious, they're not in better shape, they don't have more money, they're not better looking, they don't have more good events and fewer bad events. The one way in which they differ, they're extremely social. They don't sit in seminars on Saturday morning. They don't spend time alone. Each of them is in a romantic relationship, and each has a rich repertoire of friends. But watch out here. This is merely correlational data, not causal, and it's about happiness in the first Hollywood sense I'm going to talk about. Happiness of ebullience and giggling and good cheer. And I'm going to suggest to you that's not nearly enough in just a moment. We found we could begin to look at interventions over the centuries, from the Buddha to Tony Robbins. About 120 interventions have been proposed that allegedly make people happy. And we find that we've been able to manualize many of them, and we actually carry out random assignment efficacy and effectiveness studies. That is, which ones actually make people lastingly happier. And in a couple of minutes, I'll tell you about some of those results. But the upshot of this is that the mission I want psychology to have, in addition to its mission of curing the mentally ill, in addition to its mission of making miserable people less miserable, is, can psychology actually make people happier? And to ask that question, happy is not a word I use very much. We've had to break it down into what I think is askable about happy. And I believe there are three different, and I call them different because different interventions build them. It's possible to have one rather than the other. Three different happy lives. The first happy life is the pleasant life. This is a life in which you have as much positive emotion as you possibly can, and the skills to amplify it. The second is a life of engagement, a life in your work, your parenting, your love, your leisure. Time stops for you. That's what Aristotle was talking about. And third, the meaningful life. So I want to say a little bit about each of those lives and what we know about them. The first life is the pleasant life, and it's simply, as best we can find it, it's having as many of the pleasures as you can, as much positive emotion as you can, and learning the skills, savoring mindfulness, that amplify them, that stretch them over time and space. But the pleasant life has three drawbacks, and it's why positive psychology is not happyology, and why it doesn't end here. The first drawback is that it turns out the pleasant life, your experience of positive emotion, is heritable, about 50% heritable, and in fact, not very modifiable. So the different tricks that Mathieu and I and others know about increasing the amount of positive emotion in your life are 15 to 20% tricks, getting more of it. Second is that positive emotion habituates. It habituates rapidly, indeed. It's all like French vanilla ice cream. The first taste is 100%. By the time you're down to the sixth taste, it's gone. And as I said, it's not particularly malleable. And this leads to the second life. And I have to tell you about my friend Len to talk about why positive psychology is more than positive emotion, more than building pleasure. In two of the three great arenas of life, by the time Len was 30, Len was enormously successful. The first arena was work. By the time he was 20, he's an options trader. By the time he was 25, he was a multimillionaire and the head of an options trading company. Second, in play, he's a national champion bridge player. And but in the third great arena of life, love, Len is an abysmal failure. And the reason he was that Len is a cold fish. Len is an introvert. American women said to Len when he dated them, "You're no fun. You don't have positive emotion. Get lost." And Len was wealthy enough to be able to afford a Park Avenue psychoanalyst who for 5 years tried to find the sexual trauma that had somehow locked positive emotion inside of him. But it turned out there wasn't any sexual trauma. It turned out that Len grew up in Long Island and he played football and watched football and played bridge. Len is in the bottom 5% of what we call positive affectivity. So the question is Len unhappy? And I want to say not, contrary to what psychology told us about the bottom 50% of the human race in positive affectivity, I think Len is one of the happiest people I know. He's not consigned to the hell of unhappiness, and that's because Len, like most of you, is enormously capable of flow. When he walks onto the floor of the American Exchange at 9:30 in the morning, time stops for him, and it stops till the closing bell. When the first card is played, till 10 days later, the tournament is over, time stops for Len. And this is indeed what Mike Csikszentmihalyi has been talking about flow, and it's distinct from pleasure in a very important way. Pleasure has raw feels. You know it's happening. There's thought and feeling, but what Mike told you yesterday, during flow, you can't feel anything. You're one with the music. Time stops. You have intense concentration. And this is indeed the characteristic of what we think of as the good life. And we think there's a recipe for it, and it's knowing what your highest strengths are. And again, there's a valid test of what your 5 highest strengths are, and then recrafting your life to use them as much as you possibly can. Recrafting your work, your love, your play, your friendship, your parenting. Just one example. One person I worked with was a bagger at Gennardi's. Hated the job. She's working her way through college. Her highest strength was social intelligence. So she recrafted bagging to make the encounter with her the social highlight of every customer's day. Now, obviously she failed, but what she did was to take her highest strengths and recraft work to use them as much as possible. What you get out of that is not smiliness. You don't look like Debbie Reynolds, you don't giggle a lot. What you get is more absorption. So that's the second path. The first path, positive emotion. The second path is eudaimonia and flow. And the third path is meaning. This is the most venerable of all the happinesses traditionally. And meaning in this view consists of, very parallel to eudaimonia, it consists of knowing what your highest strengths are and using them to belong to and in the service of something larger than you are. Well, I mentioned that for all 3 kinds of lives, the pleasant life, the good life, the meaningful life, people are now hard at work on the question, are there things that lastingly change those lives? And the answer seems to be yes, and I'll just give you some samples of it. It's being done in a rigorous manner. It's being done in the same way that we test drugs to see what really works. So we do random assignment, placebo-controlled, long-term studies of different interventions. And just to sample the kind of interventions that we find have an effect. When we teach people about the pleasant life, how to have more pleasure in your life, one of your assignments is to take the mindfulness skills, the savoring skills, and you're assigned to design a beautiful day. Next Saturday, set a day aside, design yourself a beautiful day, and use savoring and mindfulness to enhance those pleasures. And we can show in that way that the pleasant life is enhanced. Gratitude visit. I want you all to do this with me now, if you would. Close your eyes. I'd like you to remember someone who did something enormously important that changed your life in the good direction, who you never properly thanked. Person has to be alive. Okay? Now, okay, you can open your eyes. I hope all of you have such a person. Your assignment when you're learning the gratitude visit is to write a 300-word testimonial to that person, call them on the phone in Phoenix, ask if you can visit, don't tell them why, show up at their door, you read the testimonial, everyone weeps when this happens, and what happens is when we test people 1 week later, a month later, 3 months later, they're both happier and less depressed. Another example is a strength state, in which we get couples to identify their highest strengths on the strengths test, and then to design an evening in which they both use their strengths. And we find this is a strengthener of relationships. And fun versus philanthropy, but it's so heartening to be in a group like this in which so many of you have turned your lives to philanthropy. Well, my undergraduates and the people I work with haven't discovered this, so we actually have people do something altruistic and do something fun, and to contrast it. And what you find is when you do something fun, it has a square wave walk set. When you do something philanthropic to help another person, it lasts and it lasts. So those are examples of positive interventions. So the next to last thing I want to say is we're interested in how much life satisfaction people have. This is really what you're about. And that's our target variable. And we ask the question, as a function of the 3 different lives, how much life satisfaction do you get? So we ask, and we've done this in 15 replications involving thousands of people, to what extent does the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of positive emotion, the pleasant life, the pursuit of engagement, time stopping for you, and the pursuit of meaning contribute to life satisfaction? And our results surprised us. They were backward of what we thought. It turns out the pursuit of pleasure has almost no contribution to life satisfaction. The pursuit of meaning is the strongest, and this is the pursuit of engagement is also very strong. Where pleasure matters is if you have both engagement and you have meaning, then pleasure is the whipped cream and the cherry, which is to say the full life, the sum is greater than the parts if you've got all 3. Conversely, if you have none of the 3, the empty life, the sum is less than the parts. And what we're asking now is, does the very same relationship, physical health, morbidity, how long you live, and productivity follow the same relationship? That is, in a corporation, is productivity a function of positive emotion, engagement, and meaning? Is health a function of positive engagement, of pleasure, and of meaning in life? And there is reason to think the answer to both of those may well be yes. So Chris said that the last speaker had a chance to try to integrate what he heard, and so this was amazing for me. I've never been in a gathering like this. I've never seen speakers stretch beyond themselves so much, which was one of the remarkable things. But I found that the problems of psychology seem to be parallel to the problems of technology, entertainment, and design. In the following way, we all know that technology, entertainment, and design have been and can be used for destructive purposes. We also know that technology, entertainment, and design can be used to relieve misery. And by the way, the distinction between relieving misery and building happiness is extremely important. I thought when I first became a therapist 30 years ago that if I could make someone, if I was good enough to make someone not depressed, not anxious, not angry, that I'd make them happy. And I never found that. I found the best you could ever do was to get to 0, that they were empty. And it turns out the skills of happiness, the skills of the pleasant life, the skills of engagement, the skills of meaning are different from the skills of relieving misery. And so the parallel thing holds with technology, entertainment, and design, I believe. That is, it is possible for these 3 drivers of our world to increase happiness, to increase positive emotion, and that's typically how they've been used. But once you fractionate happiness the way I do, not just positive emotion, that's not nearly enough. There's flow in life and there's meaning in life. As Laura Lee told us, design, and I believe entertainment and technology, can be used to increase meaning engagement in life as well. So in conclusion, the 11th reason for optimism, in addition to the space elevator, is that I think with technology, entertainment, and design, we can actually increase the amount of tonnage of human happiness on the planet. And if technology can, in the next decade or two, increase the pleasant life, the good life, and the meaningful life, it will be good enough. If entertainment can be diverted to also increase positive emotion, meaning eudaimonia, it will be good enough. And if design can increase positive emotion, eudaimonia and flow and meaning, what we're all doing together will become good enough. Thank you.